The rain was relentless, falling in heavy sheets that blurred the edges of everything. Faces, shapes, even the hope that once seemed so steady. Elena sat in the muddy trench, her uniform soaked through, the cold seeping deep into her bones. Beside her, Mira was quiet, staring into the distance, with eyes heavy from exhaustion. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something darker, fear. They had been waiting for hours, but Elena knew the silence was only the calm before the storm. The enemy was near. Every muscle in her body tensed, every sense sharpened. She glanced at Mira, her friend and fellow soldier. Despite the weariness etched into Myra's face, there was a fierce determination in her eyes. They had survived this long together, and neither was ready to give up now. The rain masked the distant sounds of movement, but Elena could feel the vibration through the ground beneath them. The weight of what was coming pressed on her chest like the mud beneath her boots. She adjusted the grip on her rifle, her fingers numb but steady. The trench was cramped and cold, but it was all they had to keep them alive. Memories flashed through Elena's mind, the training, the battles, the moments of laughter and hope in between the chaos. But none of that mattered now. The war was a living thing, hungry and relentless, and it was coming for them. Suddenly, the earth trembled violently as a mortar shell exploded nearby, sending shards of dirt and metal into the air. Elena ducked instinctively, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. When the dust settled, she saw Mira clutching her leg, blood seeping through her fingers. The sharp pain in Myra's eyes was a shock, but what struck Elena harder was the unspoken fear, the fear of being left behind. "Elena," Mira whispered, voice trembling, "I can't. I'm hit." Elena didn't hesitate. She crawled over to her friend, searching quickly for the wound. It was deep, and the blood was flowing fast. Panic rose, but she forced it down. There was no time for fear now, only action. "We have to move," Elena said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here." Mira tried to shake her head, but Elena wasn't listening. She wrapped her arms around Mira, lifting her carefully onto her back. The weight was heavier than she expected, and the cold rain made her grip slippery. Every muscle in her body screamed with the effort, but she pushed forward, driven by something deeper than fear, loyalty, love, survival. The mud clung to her boots as she took her first agonizing step out of the trench. The enemy's voices were closer now, and the sharp cracks of rifles echoed in the distance. Elena's breath came fast, each inhale burning in her lungs. Behind her, Myra's shallow breaths were a fragile reminder of what was at stake. Step by step, Elena moved forward, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her mind screamed with warnings, danger, exhaustion, the impossibility of their task. But surrender was not an option. Not for them. As she navigated the slippery battlefield, Elena's thoughts drifted to the people waiting for them. Families, friends, futures that still deserved a chance. She clung to those thoughts like a lifeline, pushing through the pain that radiated from her own legs, from the weight of her wounded friend. The rain fell harder, blurring the line between sky and earth, between life and death. Every splash of water, every distant boom, reminded Elena that this was no ordinary fight. It was a test of will, of heart. Her vision blurred with rain and fatigue, but she refused to look back. Myra's head rested against her shoulder, her strength fading, but her spirit unbroken. Together, they were a single force, a story of courage and determination written in mud and blood. Elena's mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear: no matter the cost, they would not surrender. Not today. Not ever. The ground shook again, harsher this time, as mortar shells rained down around them. Elena's heart pounded in her chest like a war drum, louder than the thunder rolling overhead. She tightened her grip on Myra's trembling body, feeling the weak pulse beneath her fingers. The rain turned to ice on her skin, but she barely noticed. The fear, the urgency, drowned out everything else. Each step through the mud was a battle. Her boots sank deeper with every move, threatening to swallow her whole. The weight of Myra's injured body was heavy, but the weight of surrender was heavier still. Elena's mind raced. Where could they go? How could they survive? But there was only one answer she knew: forward. The enemy's voices grew louder, angry and relentless, echoing through the darkened battlefield. Elena's ears burned with the sound of shouting orders and the sharp cracks of gunfire. Bullets zipped past her like angry hornets, kicking up mud and water with every strike. She held her breath, forcing herself to keep moving, each agonizing step a testament to her will. Mira groaned softly against Elena's back, pain etched into every breath. "Elena," she whispered, voice trembling, "I don't know how much longer I can hold on." Elena swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that burned behind her eyes. "You will," she promised fiercely. "I won't let anything happen to you." A sudden flash lit the sky, followed by a deafening explosion nearby. The shockwave knocked Elena off balance, and for a terrifying moment she thought they might both fall. But she gritted her teeth and steadied herself, refusing to give the enemy the satisfaction. The trench behind them was swallowed by darkness and gunfire, but ahead lay only the unknown. She scanned desperately for any sign of shelter, any glimpse of their comrades. The rain fell harder, soaking her through to the bone. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but surrender was not in her nature. Elena thought about home, about the promises they had made to themselves before the war, the dreams, the future stolen by violence. She couldn't let those dreams die here in the mud and rain. For Mira, for herself. A sudden cry pierced the storm, a soldier calling out for help. Elena's heart clenched. Was it a friend? Or another enemy closing in? She had no time to wonder. Her focus snapped back to the present. One step at a time. One breath at a time. Her legs trembled beneath her, fatigue clawing at every nerve. The mud was relentless, sucking at her boots and slowing her progress. The rain mixed with the blood on Myra's sleeve, dark and sticky. Elena's hands shook, but her grip never faltered. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than to Mira. The words felt fragile, but they kept her moving. Another mortar exploded nearby, sending shards of earth flying. Elena dove forward instinctively, shielding Myra's body with her own. The cold mud soaked her face, but she pushed through the pain. She couldn't stop, not now. Her lungs burned with every breath, but adrenaline pushed her onward. The cries behind them began to fade, replaced by distant voices, her comrades, the lifeline she needed. With one final surge, Elena scrambled toward the faint glow of safety. The world around her blurred, but she held on to Mira with everything she had left. They were alive, still fighting. No matter the cost, surrender was not an option. Not for Elena, not for Mira, not today. Elena's arms trembled as she pushed herself off the ground, her knees sinking deep into the cold, clinging mud. Myra's weight was still across her back, and the pain in Elena's shoulders had turned from burning to numb. Her muscles screamed with every movement, but she gritted her teeth and rose again. The sounds of war echoed all around, gunfire, shouting, the hollow boom of distant artillery. But her focus stayed on the path ahead, even if she couldn't fully see it. Every step forward felt stolen from death itself. The rain had turned the ground into a trap, pulling at her boots, slowing her progress to a crawl. She slipped again, knees crashing into the wet earth. Mira gasped in pain, her arms tightening briefly around Elena's neck before falling limp again. "I've got you," Elena muttered, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I won't stop. I won't leave you." She had no plan, no map, only instinct and sheer will driving her forward. Somewhere beyond the smoke and chaos was a friendly outpost. Somewhere help waited. But between here and there was only open ground, and every inch of it wanted them dead. A shout rang out behind her. Elena froze. Was it the enemy? She didn't dare look back. Her heart pounded louder than the rain. Her body wanted to collapse, to let go, but her mind screamed at her to move. She forced herself up again and pressed on, eyes searching for anything, cover, a ridge, a tree, anything that could give them a few seconds of protection. But the landscape offered no kindness. Just mud, smoke, and shadows moving in the distance. Another crack of gunfire, closer this time. Dirt sprayed near her feet. They were being hunted. Elena shifted Myra's weight and picked up her pace, ignoring the stabbing pain in her ribs. Her breathing grew shallow, and every inhale brought a shudder. The world narrowed to one goal: keep moving, keep Myra alive. "Stay with me," she whispered. "You're not dying here. Not like this." Myra let out a weak sound, barely audible, but it was enough. She was still conscious, still fighting. That sound gave Elena just enough strength to keep going. Ahead, a broken tree lay half buried in the mud, its trunk split from an earlier blast. It wasn't much, but it was cover. Elena staggered toward it, slipping once more, but she didn't fall. Her boots dragged, her hands slick with rain and blood, but she made it. She dropped behind the tree and knelt, adjusting Myra carefully. The moment she set her down, Myra's eyes fluttered open. You should have left me," Myra whispered. Elena shook her head. "Never. You're not just a soldier. You're my sister." The words hung heavy in the air, not by blood, but by something stronger. They had trained together, bled together, survived together. And now they were trying to live through what felt impossible. Myra tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace. "You're stubborn. You're still alive, aren't you?" Elena replied, forcing a small, shaky smile. A sudden flash of movement caught her eye. Enemy soldiers moving in the distance, searching. Too close. Elena's heart dropped, but her expression stayed hard. She couldn't let them find them. Not now. Not when they'd made it this far. She looked down at Myra, who met her gaze without fear. There was no more time to rest. Elena knew what had to be done. "I'm going to carry you the rest of the way," she said. Myra didn't argue. Elena lifted her again, every inch of her body burning in protest. But her spirit didn't bend. In the heart of a storm, with the enemy closing in and the world crumbling around them, two soldiers moved through the darkness, not with strength alone, but with a promise that neither would be left behind. The storm of war showed no signs of slowing. Lightning cracked across the sky, revealing the silhouettes of soldiers moving through the fog. Elena ducked low, Myra still clinging weakly to her back, the blood from her wounded leg soaking deeper into Elena's shirt. Every sound became sharper, the squelch of boots in the mud, the whistle of incoming fire, the distant mechanical grind of a tank rolling in the distance. The enemy was everywhere, and there was nowhere left to hide. Elena crouched behind the shattered tree for a few seconds longer, her chest rising and falling like a drumbeat in overdrive. She could feel Myra's breathing against her neck, faint but steady. The weight on her back wasn't just physical. It was everything they'd been through, every friend they'd lost, every promise they hadn't yet fulfilled. Gunfire burst out again to the left, closer than before. A voice shouted in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was clear: search and destroy. Elena's fingers clenched around the strap of her rifle. She knew what they would do if they found them. Surrender wasn't survival. It was a sentence. She couldn't wait any longer. With a grunt, she stood up again, the weight pulling hard on her spine. Mira groaned softly, her head resting on Elena's shoulder. There was pain in every step, and the cold had turned her limbs into stone. But there was no time for pain, no room for doubt. Elena pushed forward, her eyes scanning the shadows ahead. If she could just make it past the next ridge, if she could find high ground, there might be a way out. Somewhere beyond the smoke was a safe zone. She had to believe that. If she didn't, Mira was already dead. A sudden voice called out again, closer, more urgent. Footsteps splashed in the mud behind her. Elena froze. She could hear at least 3 men. They were tracking something. Maybe them. She crouched low, pressing herself and Mira into the thick underbrush. Her heart pounded loud in her ears. She reached down and grabbed a handful of wet soil, smearing it across Myra's back and then her own face. They had to disappear, even for just a few seconds. The footsteps stopped. One soldier coughed. Another muttered something sharp and frustrated. Elena held her breath. 1 step, 2 steps, closer. Then, without warning, a flare shot into the sky from far off to the west. It lit up the battlefield in a harsh red glow. Shadows stretched across the mud like grasping hands. The enemy soldiers cursed and turned toward the light, distracted. That was her moment. Elena surged up, her legs screaming in protest, and pushed forward through the underbrush. She didn't look back. There was no point. The next few minutes would decide everything. Branches whipped at her face as she moved through the thick, wet vegetation. Mira groaned again, but her arms held tight. That meant she was still with her, still fighting, in her own quiet way. The ground sloped upward. A hill. Finally, Elena pushed harder, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her vision blurred, but she kept her feet moving. At the top of the ridge, she dropped behind a half-collapsed wall, probably the remains of a farmhouse once. From here, she could see far into the distance. Through the trees, through the mist, lights. Not enemy lights. Blue lights. A signal. A checkpoint. Home. Elena almost collapsed, but she didn't. Instead, she adjusted Myra's weight on her back and whispered, "We're close. Just a little further." Mira didn't respond, but Elena felt the smallest squeeze on her shoulder. That was enough. With the enemy still behind them and the promise of safety ahead, Elena moved again. Step by step, inch by inch. Her body was breaking, but her will had never been stronger. Elena's legs were no longer moving by strength, but by memory. 1 step, then another. Her boots dragged through the mud, soles half-torn, knees buckling with each rise in the uneven ground. She didn't feel the cold anymore. She didn't even feel the pain. All that remained was the rhythm of her breath, shallow and ragged, and Myra's faint heartbeat against her spine. The blue checkpoint lights flickered in the distance like a mirage. They were still too far, but they were real, and that meant they had a chance. Behind her, a gunshot cracked through the air, followed by a yell. The enemy had seen the flare too. They were closing in, faster now, more aggressive. Elena didn't look back. She couldn't afford the time or the fear. Every second wasted was a second Mira didn't have. "Just hold on," Elena whispered, voice shaking. "You're almost there." Mira mumbled something she couldn't understand. Her head rested heavier now, body slumped, barely conscious. Elena could feel how cold she was getting. Her body was shutting down. The slope ahead was steeper than it looked. Elena dropped to one knee as her leg finally gave out. She groaned, biting down on her lip, so hard she tasted blood. She tried to rise again, but her balance faltered. Myra's body slid slightly to the side. Elena caught her with trembling arms and held her close. "No," she said through gritted teeth. "Not like this." She looked around, eyes scanning the broken terrain. No cover, no help, no time. Her vision blurred as rain ran down her face and mixed with tears she didn't want to admit were there. For a moment, she thought about dropping the rifle. Maybe it would be easier. But then she heard footsteps again, quick, sharp, deliberate. They were being hunted. If she stopped now, it wouldn't just be failure. It would be the end. She adjusted Myra's weight and pushed herself up again, legs shaking violently. Her breath came out in gasps, each one harder to find. The mud sucked at her with every step, pulling her backward like the war didn't want to let them go. She pressed on. One of the enemy soldiers shouted something in the distance. Another gunshot rang out. This one hit close, too close. A chunk of earth exploded just feet from them, spraying mud across Elena's back. Her knees buckled again, but she didn't fall. She couldn't. Myra's life wasn't just in her hands. It was on her shoulders. She remembered a moment from training years ago. Mira had fallen during a drill, her boot twisted, her leg bleeding. Everyone else kept running. Elena had stopped, carried her through the finish line. Even then, people told her it was reckless. But that's who she was. The woman who didn't leave anyone behind. She dug deep into whatever strength was left and climbed the final ridge. The blue lights glowed stronger now. A faint buzz in the air told her they were near the perimeter fence. She could see shadows ahead, moving, shifting. Soldiers. But these weren't enemies. These were hers. She tried to shout, but her voice cracked. Her throat burned. All she managed was a broken whisper. Still, someone saw them. "Medic," a voice called. Flashlights cut through the dark. Boots pounded the earth, coming closer. Elena felt arms reach for her, lift Mira off her back. Another hand grabbed her arm. Someone was shouting, but it was all a blur. Elena collapsed to her knees. Her body gave out at last, but she didn't care. She looked up, barely able to focus, and saw Myra's face, pale, eyes barely open, but breathing. They had made it. Not by luck, not by power, by refusing to let go. Elena opened her eyes to a pale ceiling, the light above her flickering faintly. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The scent of antiseptic filled her nose. Her hands, bandaged and trembling, rested on a thin blanket. Her uniform was gone. Her boots were gone. But the ache in her muscles told her everything had been real. She sat up too fast, pain ripping through her side. A nurse rushed over, urging her to lie back down, but she pushed the hands away, her voice hoarse. "Where's Mira?" The nurse didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned and gestured toward the curtain behind her. Elena didn't wait. She swung her legs off the bed, ignoring the sharp protest from her body, and limped across the small room. Mira was there, pale, unconscious, but breathing. Elena exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. A monitor beeped steadily beside the bed, for lines ran to Myra's arm, and her leg was elevated, heavily wrapped. There was blood beneath the gauze, but it wasn't fresh. They had made it in time. Elena gripped the edge of the bed and lowered herself into the chair beside her. Her eyes locked on Myra's face, searching for signs of movement. "She's stable," came a voice from behind. A medic. Young but tired. Lost a lot of blood, but she's strong. Elena nodded slowly, her throat tightening. She didn't trust her voice to speak again. "You carried her for nearly 2 kilometers, the medic added. "Under fire. Through no man's land. That's something we don't see often." Elena didn't answer. Her eyes remained on Mira. Every part of her still felt like she was back in the mud, fighting for breath. "I'll give you some time," the medic said, stepping out quietly. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was recovery. It was the weight of survival settling in. Elena reached out and took Myra's hand, cold but not lifeless. She held it gently, not wanting to disturb her, but needing the contact. "You made it," she whispered. "We both did." The curtain behind her rustled slightly. Another soldier peeked in, one of the ones from the checkpoint. He nodded respectfully and set down a bag, Elena's things. Her ID, her tags. Myra's dog tags, too. "Command wants to debrief you when you're ready," he said quietly. "No rush." She gave him a tired look. He nodded again and left without another word. Elena leaned back in the chair, still gripping Myra's hand. Her body was wrecked, but she didn't care. She had done what she said she would. No one had been left behind. Hours passed. Maybe more. The flickering light above buzzed on and off. At some point, Myra stirred. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes opened, slowly, groggily. "Elena," she croaked. Elena sat forward instantly. "I'm here." Myra blinked a few times, trying to focus. "You didn't leave." A faint smile broke across Elena's face. "Told you I wouldn't." Myra closed her eyes again, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I thought I was dead." "You almost were," Elena said softly. "But I wasn't going to let that happen." There were no grand speeches, no cheering crowd, just two battered soldiers in a quiet room, surrounded by the aftermath of everything they'd been through. Outside, the storm had passed. But inside, the fight to heal was just beginning. Elena squeezed Myra's hand a little tighter. For now, that was enough. The rain had stopped, but the chill still lingered. Days had passed since Elena carried Myra through the storm, yet the weight of that night hadn't left her shoulders. She sat on the hospital bench outside Myra's room, staring at the floor, her hands clenched around a worn photograph of their unit. Before everything fell apart, she had been debriefed twice. The higher-ups asked the same questions, over and over. How close were the enemy? What weapons did they use? How many casualties? Elena answered with a blank voice, always circling back to the same truth. We shouldn't have been there alone. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of the politics, the orders, the silence that followed every mistake. Myra was alive. That was the only thing that mattered. Inside the room, Myra was recovering slowly. She couldn't walk yet, but her color was returning, and the fire in her voice had begun to spark again. Elena visited every morning, every night. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they just sat in silence. That silence was enough. Elena finally stood and stepped inside. Myra was awake, propped up by pillows, a small notebook in her lap. She had been trying to write a letter to her younger brother, but her hands still shook. Elena crossed the room and sat down without a word. Myra looked up. "Still here?" "Still here," Elena replied. Myra glanced at the window. Funny how quiet it gets after chaos. Elena nodded. Too quiet sometimes. They sat for a long moment, the hum of hospital machines filling the space between them. Then Myra spoke again, softer this time. "I thought you were going to die out there," she said. "I thought we both were." Myra looked down at her leg, wrapped tight, metal pins holding bone together beneath the skin. "You could have dropped me. Saved yourself." Elena's voice was steady. "I didn't carry you out of guilt. I carried you because I knew you'd do the same for me." Myra didn't respond right away. Then she smiled, small but real. "You're a terrible liar." Elena let out the faintest laugh. "Maybe, but I'm not wrong." There was a knock at the door. A soldier stepped in, a courier, and handed Elena an envelope marked Command Briefing. Urgent. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the contents. Her expression didn't change, but Mira noticed the slight shift in her breathing. "They're redeploying you," Mira said quietly. Elena didn't answer at first. She folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. "It's routine. They need someone who knows the terrain." Myra's eyes darkened. "You're not ready." "I don't have a choice." Mira tried to sit up straighter, wincing as pain shot through her side. "You've done enough, Elena. Let someone else carry the weight." Elena stood, walking over to the window. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting pale light over the distant hills. She stared at it for a long time. "We made it out," she said. "But others won't unless someone keeps going." Mira shook her head. "And what if you don't come back?" Elena turned, meeting her gaze. "Then at least I'll know I did everything I could." Neither spoke after that. The silence returned, heavy but not empty. When Elena finally left the room, Mira watched her go, her hand unconsciously gripping the edge of the blanket like she was trying to hold on. The war wasn't over. Not out there. Not inside them. But they had survived. And sometimes survival meant carrying the scars forward, even if it meant walking alone. The wind on the ridge was sharp, carrying the scent of ash and earth. Elena stood alone, her rifle slung across her back, boots planted in the same soil that had nearly buried her. Ahead, the valley stretched wide, quiet, broken, familiar. Somewhere down there, beyond the charred tree-line and rusted barbed wire, was the place she had crawled through with Mira on her back. She didn't need a map. The memory was carved into her bones. The new unit behind her was younger, fresher. Some still wore clean gear, their expressions too calm for what was coming. They didn't know yet, not really. Elena had seen the briefing room earlier that morning, full of confident voices and nervous laughs. They had orders. But orders meant nothing when the ground shook and the sky burned. She turned away from the valley and looked toward the med tent at the far end of the base. Mira had been moved there 3 days ago, temporarily, before they sent her home for good. Her leg would never fully heal, but she could walk again, slowly, carefully. Her place was no longer in the trenches. And deep down, Elena knew that was a good thing. Still, she hadn't said goodbye yet. Elena walked across the compound, boots crunching on gravel. Each step felt heavier the closer she got. Inside the tent, Mira sat near the far cot, propped up by a pillow, a cane leaning beside her. She was dressed in civilian clothes for the first time in years. She didn't look like a soldier anymore. She looked free. "You're late," Mira said, without turning. Elena smiled faintly. "Didn't know we had an appointment." Mira looked over her shoulder, eyes sharp despite the bruises that still lingered around her cheek. "They're shipping me out in the morning." "I heard." A pause settled between them, long and heavy. "You going back out there?" Mira asked. Elena nodded. "They want someone who's been through that sector." Mira turned to face her fully now, her voice edged with frustration. "You've already done enough." "I know. Then why are you still fighting?" Elena looked down for a moment. She had asked herself the same question in the dark hours of every night since they were rescued. She didn't have a perfect answer, but she had one that felt true. "Because the ones we lost didn't get a second chance. I did, and I won't waste it." Mira stared at her, jaw clenched, then looked away. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. If it comes down to it, save yourself this time." Elena stepped forward and gently placed Myra's dog tags into her hand. "I already did." Myra's fingers closed around the metal, and for the first time, her eyes brimmed with tears. She didn't wipe them away. Neither did Elena. Outside, an engine roared to life. The next transport was preparing. Time was running short. "All right," Mira said quietly. "I'll read it," Elena replied. And then, with nothing more than a nod, she turned and walked out of the tent. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the ridge. Elena slung her rifle back over her shoulder and headed toward the transport. War hadn't ended, but a chapter had. 2 soldiers had refused to surrender. And now, one would carry on the fight, while the other finally went home. Not all stories ended in silence. Some ended in survival. And in that there was victory.